map tool. There is a plugin for catalog that implements the catalog here to browse data and so on. And all the plugins has more or less this shape. They export. There are several ways to export plugins. I'll explain it later when we will develop plugin. Anyway, one of the way to export a plugin is to use this utility function called create plugin with the name of the plugin, and then the component that implements the UI. Basically, this is the component. This is connected in line, but anyway, you can imagine that you can do const component, and this is the connect function we have seen yesterday that uses something to get the state and connect it to the real component. And then here you can imagine that it is used here, and then some other properties to include the reducers, epics related to this plugin. So basically, this is the main structure of the directory of MapStore. You can find other directories that contains, for instance, the stories. You don't have to care about them or the product. Examples and so on. There is a directory for translations that contains all the translation files for all the part for everything. And these files are loaded when you switch language. For instance, when you switch language, this JSON file is loaded. You see that, yes, for instance, if I switch to French, I download the French file, and with all the messages and localization. And this structure contains the main plugins part of the framework. There is another directory called product. That contains the plugin and another similar structure, but contains plugins that are only part of the final product that is deployed here in dev. That is this is the final product. It so contains also the fork me on GitHub plugin or mailing list plugin that are not part of the framework but only part of the for instance here this is the fork me on GitHub link. This plugin is this, and it's not included in the framework but only in the final product. Okay, and the product plugin contains also the list of the plugins included in the product. There is a plugin.js files that imports all the plugins available in the final product. These are the plugins that are available in the build version of MapStore. Let's see it a little more in detail. What are the plugins and how to handle them and how to include them. We are getting near to the interesting part. The most interesting part is basically as I say, the plugin is the main development unit that you can imagine for MapStore. You can imagine a plugin as in its simplest form as a component. Here I wrote some, I think I typed something wrong. Let me go in history. Just a second. Don't remember. Okay, I can remove it, I think. Anyway, it was a typo. Okay. You can imagine a plugin as a component that is simply rendered in MapStore. Rendered in MapStore UI as it is. For instance, if I create this plugin here, let's call it. I have already here an example plugin, but let me remove it. Let me move for a moment these samples here. Just a second. Okay. So let's create, for instance, a new plugin by including this. This is a simple component. It has a style. It is this is a JSX. It is a simple component that writes hello in a div, and I export it using create plugin utility, declaring the name and declaring the component it's using. This is a simple thing, simple hello world for MapStore. You can include it in a new file called in plugin directory. You can create a new file here in plugin web client plugins directory called example sx. You can simply create this simple component here and include it. There are three things to do in order to include the plugin in MapStore product. And a similar way you can do it in a project or in Genode. You have to include it here. Then you have to create the file, then include it in the plugin.js index file. There is a plugin.js for each project, and the product is a project, more or less. And so you can open the product plugins.js and include your new file here by calling with using this syntax example and postponing plugin string to the entry, and then including the file. Here I have to write default. I'll explain later why. The three things that I have to do are to create the file, include it in plugin.js, and include it in web client local config. That is the main configuration file of MapStore. Here there is a configuration file with all the settings, and there is a plugins.desktop entry for plugins. There is a plugins entry here where you can find all the plugins for all the pages of MapStore. There is a dedicated entry point for MapStore viewer, the map viewer. The map viewer has three different entry points: one for mobile, one for desktop, and one for embedded mode. Now let's concentrate with desktop part, and the only thing that you have to include is to include it here in the list of the plugins in the desktop mode example. The only thing that you have to do is to include the name of the plugin here. So summarizing 3 things: creating the file in the simplest way. It is a component, and you can use create plugin with the name of the plugin and the component included in this, declared in this way. Adding it to the plugins.js, and then add it in localconfig.js. Let me include another attender. When I do the 3 things, if I save my plugins file, I cannot resolve it. I have another person join. Okay. I wrote something wrong, maybe. Plugins example. I moved it. I put it in the wrong place. I have to move this example from product plugins into plugins. I put it in the wrong place. Now, if I have found it, I include example in plugins example, and then if when the page refreshes, because reloading the code I changed in real time, I can see there is a hello here that you can see. Let's dial it a little bit, because I position absolute. I have to put that in that index in order to show it above the map. So as well as I save, the build is done automatically, and so it is refreshed automatically. And you will see that you have the simplest plugin that you can imagine here. So summarizing, to include a plugin, you have to define it using the create plugin function. You have to include it in plugins.js, and you have to include it in local config, desktop entry point, plugins desktop entry point, and some other details about this procedure. First of all, in MapStore you will find several ways to defining plugins. This is because of the history of MapStore. We have plugins that has been created before there was a convention for exporting plugins before we created this utility. Anyway, for new plugins, we use many times we always use create plugin for new plugins. We will define in the future some procedures and some standard parts in order to well define these standards. And in the future we will add to documentation also, and we will uniform also the other plugins to follow the same convention. But if you explore the framework sometimes you can find plugins, for instance, defined in other ways. For instance, this is another way to export. It's okay to export it in this way, and it's the same of using create plugin. Now we will deprecate this way in favor of a standard way for all the plugins. And other details about that, in MapStore we will find import mixed to require. These are 2 different strategies to import file from one module to another in JavaScript. One uses require.js, that was a library, and another, the import is a new syntax of ECMAScript. MapStore started when import was not yet standard, so older components as require, and import initially didn't have a way to load modules asynchronously. So for this reason, MapStore used require a lot to import the modules from other files or libraries. This is a library imported. If you instead use the path, this is a file imported, a file from local directory. And for this reason, for these two reasons, import was not standard at the moment when we started developing MapStore, and it didn't initially support asynchronous require. We use a lot require here and there in MapStore. In the technical depth of this year, so before the end of the year, probably we will migrate everything to import notation. Anyway, you will find these mixed syntax in importing files. Especially this is problematic for so if you don't know the two systems very well, and you find confusing these default imports and the reason of that. Now I'm going to explain them. Anyway, in the future they will be removed. If you the import and require works cannot work together in the same file, so you cannot mix require and import notation in the same file. But you can import a file or require a file that uses import require without any problem. So for instance, here I use require and I import a file that uses imports inside. I require a file that uses imports inside. The only problem is that if I use here, typically in import notation, I use export default notation, and if I use this export default, I can import it in another file. I can import this file by doing import import add group from path to the file, or alternative I have to use require path dot default. This is the only difference. So if a file uses import and exports a default, to import this default you have to use this syntax in required syntax. For this reason, here we will find a mixed usage of default or not. Typically, every time you see default, the required element uses export default here. You can see that there is an export default here. The file that doesn't use it typically use require. And the required syntax to export is model.export equal something. So all the plugins, all the plugins that doesn't use the import syntax are required this way. The new ones are required this way. These files use typically the import syntax. So every time you use, if you develop new plugins, you will have to use the new syntax. And so in plugins, you will have, until we don't uniform everything, you will have to use the .default notation in order to import it. Otherwise, it will not work. It will give you, if for instance I import this way, I will not see the plugin because it is not present. And I will see a warning, I think in the
How's the escape zone? Is it the break? Hello?
No, I think it's some kind of connection lost.
Connection.
I think it's connection lost.
Oh, okay, okay.
Are you still there?
Yeah, we are
Okay.
around, but Lorenzo is not around.
I'm Lorenzo. I'm Lorenzo.
Ah,
I joined for
someone's.
okay. I was kicked off by Zoom. I don't know why. Let's restart. Let me share again the screen. Let me close. Okay, just a second. Let me close everything. Okay, let's restart what I was saying. Okay, so about the syntax, if you find this and if you write new plugins, probably you will have to use default in order to use the new syntax as well until we uniform it, I think in the next release. In the next release, we will replace all requires into plugins, into import notation, and this will not be a problem anymore. Anyway, if you try to import this, it will not work. It doesn't find any file about that, and it typically doesn't render nothing. And if you add the default instead, it works. Okay. So we developed the simpler example we can imagine. You can improve our plugin that we created by adding reducers, actions, triggered, and epics using the connect function we we explained in that previous lesson. Now we will see a little bit more in detail. When you connect for instance, we can improve our example. Instead of showing hello, we can use it to show the current zoom level of the map. So for instance, here if you look at the developer tools, I can see that when I change that zoom, this comment button is to clear the current action. If I zoom in, I have a change zoom level action that changes the state of the application in the map and gets the zoom from 5 to 6. In order to get pieces of state, there is another directory in MapStore that has functions that parse the global state and returns the variables we need. It's a collection of functions called selectors. You can find it here. For each reducer, more or less, you will see a selector, or for each plugin, you will find a selector dedicated to that. For instance, we have a selector for map that for sure provides some selector to get the map. As you can see here, there is a it gets the map dot present. If the history is present, you can ignore the internal. Using this selector, you can ignore the internal structure of the state and use simply these functions to parse the whole state and get the variables you are interested to. For instance, here I can get, yes, I can try to show instead the current projection of the map. I can use the projection selector or this way. I can use my plugin, and I can use the connect function from React Redux. I can import using this is the sorry team. Here you can use the connect function. This import notation with brackets is similar to, and those also the same of the what we have seen. It was the let me get it. We have seen in the syntax. It was the same that we have seen it with the structuring. It gets a piece of that library or a piece of that exported by this file. Here in Redux you will see an export connect somewhere. Export const connect here, and from export const connect you can import it by doing this using this notation. The same for our selector. I can import it by selectors map, and I can use this syntax to get my projection selector from this has been exported. Here you can see that this uses the require syntax because it's an old file, but anyway I can import anyway sub settings without using default in this case. You can, because I'm using import doesn't care about default, is automatic for default. Instead require uses needs the dot default notation to get the export default element. If you export normally, you don't have default to add the dot default. It's a little hard to get into this default notation and mix it with require, but when you get in, you learn how to do it, or at least you can try by error. So I import connect function from React Redux library. I import projection selector from my selectors, and then I can use I can create a connected component, const connected component, and using connect function, and I can use the connect function has the map state to prop function as the first argument, so I can here I have the global state as argument, and I can use I can return the properties passed to the component by using, for instance, projection equal projection selector applied to the state. This way I get the global state and I extract the using the selector from the state the projection. Projection selector is this function that uses that gets from the map the projection, and I can use this component, this connected component. I can use this, apply this enhancer that is created by connect to the component. This is the typical notation you use to connect the component, because let me explain it a little bit. This connect function returns a function. We call this that can be applied to the component. We call this function, this particular functions enhancers. Let's explain it a little bit. Enhancer. I don't remember how to write an answer. Okay, it should be the correct syntax. And then I apply this function to the component. This makes the component aware of the state. And I can use the connect component inside my plugin. This connects the state of the application to the component that normally shows only hello. Now here I have the properties. Passed here, and I can use it, and I can use them in the JSX to display the projection. The current projection of the map is, and I can use props dot. The property projection is here returned by this. This is the map state to props function. I can save it, and I will see the changes on my UI. And if I wrote it correctly, because never say ever. Yes. And you can see that current projection of the map is this. If I switch projection, it automatically changes because it's monitoring the same state point. Let's recap a little bit to understand what we learned or what we tried to learn now. As I said, a plugin can be created by creating a file, and to include it to MapStore, you simply have to add it to the plugins list in the product or project. And then you have to add it to localconfig.js in order to configure the application to use that plugin that is declared here, and the code is included here. At this stage, you can enhance your plugin to do something else than displaying a simple string. And to do so, you have to use a React Redux library that allows to connect the state of Redux with the components. And you can do it using the connect function. Let's repeat the connect function. The connect function has this shape. The easier way is to simply use map state to props. Then we will try to use the other arguments later. But for the moment, I can simply imagine map state to props as a function that maps the global state to the properties that I have to pass to my component. then I have to apply the connect to my component in order to connect my component. And this is the shape we used more or less. I can write in the same way here. Map state props. Let's, if you are not confident with this syntax, I can make it more explicit. Can do. It returns an object with the properties to pass, and I can use map state to props in the connected component, and then pass the connected component to the component entry of the plugin. So this is the React component. This is the function that connects the state of Redux to and maps it to properties passed to this component. This is the glue code that connects this state to the component. And after all, we have a component that we can use in our application connected to the state, directly connected to the state. Is it clear? Any question? Did you understood more or less these steps we followed?
Yeah, for me, I really get it. Maybe because I once looked at the MapStore source codes.
Okay.
Very good.
Others?
We are okay. For me, it's okay, and I've just followed up the steps of how to create a plugin, but the other sort of connecting, somehow the concept will become clear when I do it practically.
Yes, the connect function. I think the most difficult thing is to understand is the connect function returns a function that have to be applied to a component to connect it. When you get in the mind into this functional way of programming, it's easier to understand because this is, I think, the most obscure part. Other than this, it's only the only thing that we did more than the standard example of Redux is to use a selector that is already present, a function already present to select some pieces of the state and don't care about anything else. Connect function has another argument that is map dispatch to props that allow to automatically map some actions creator in order to dispatch some actions. This is very useful if you want to dispatch actions from the user interface. This is the way we do it. For instance, we can add the button here. To zoom in. And we can add the handler. And I forgot. I didn't put the projection here. I forgot to edit the history. Anyway, let's do it let's do it again. Now I hope I recreated the previous plugin we did. Yes. Here, if I switch, I have the change maps CRS that change the projection. And of course, you will see the new projection here. Switch. I added this new button here. And I want to dispatch an action that zooms in in this component. Let's see the actions of the map that provides a zoom. Map. Probably they are in the map. There is a change zoom level action. So you have to get the current zoom level and increment by 1 in order to change the zoom level. I can use this change zoom level action here and add it as a second argument. The most easier way to use map dispatch to prompt the second argument of connect that allows to dispatch actions is to pass an object with the actions that you have. I can import it from actions map. Oh, I used the wrong syntax. Oh, sorry again. Nope. Now I imported here, and I adding this part to the adding the second argument to the connect makes the properties contain also this entry other than this. Allow to contain also this property that is a function to call in order to trigger the action. Here I have to zoom in, and so instead of here I can create another function that on click calls the change props dot change zoom level, and here I have to put zoom level. For instance, let's put a constant just to try it, and let's call the button to zoom level 1. And let's wait. So if I click here, you will see that change zoom level is triggered. The action contains zoom 1, and the state changed to zoom to 1, level 1. Now we have to get in order to increment or decrement and emulate these two buttons functionality in our context, just as an exercise. We need also the zoom level, the current zoom level of the map. I can use another selector from here. Select. Sorry. Selectors map. This one. I don't see a predefined selector for zoom, but I can use the map selector and then use the zoom. I can create even my own selector in my plugin or in my selector file anyway. Let's create it just to try to understand also how to create a selector on our own using other selectors. For instance, here I can create a zoom selector. Here I can extract map state and then I can return. Here this is the optional chaining that allow me to not having error if map state for some reason is undefined. And the map selector is from here. I can include it from here. Here I have the zoom selector. So here in the map props, I can add the current zoom using the zoom selector on the state. And then I have another property called current zoom here. And I can add the button here. For instance, I can add the two buttons called the zoom in and node where use the current zoom plus one and more zoom out with the current zoom minus one properties.current zoom. So summarizing, I used the same handler to change the zoom level and reuse a part of the state, especially the current zoom part of the state, to increment and decrement the zoom level. So now our plugin should be able to zoom in and zoom out and show the current projection. So now we are using the state of the application by itself, but we can create the state for our own for our plugin. For instance, here I can add to this plugin that is a toolbox. It is becoming a toolbox of various things. I can add to this input box, a text area to take notes. I don't remember exactly what's if text area use a value because it's a lot of it's a very long time I didn't use it. Text area, yes, it uses value, and I can now I can write something here and this stays, but I cannot. It is not present in the state. I can use a reducer for that. This is because of the input. Normally, the state here is not performed. For instance, if I have a counter, let's use a counter because it's clearer for this way. let's imagine that instead of taking notes, we have a button. Let's create another div with a button for increment counter. And a counter value. Okay. Now I cannot increment the counter yet because I don't persist this state, and so I cannot increment anything. In order to do so, we have to create our own custom reducer. We can use the internal state of React somehow. You can use, in particular, you can switch to the explicit way of creating the module, creating the arrow function that implements the component, and I can use one functionality from React that is called use state here, and I can use a local state here to this is a particular thing of React. Count set count, and I can use this variable to increment our counter. This is the React way of keeping the state in the UI, but this way is limited to the React component. It is not part of the global state, so you cannot share the state with the other components and or with epics and so on. So it depends from what you need. If you only need a local state, this is a no. And that's something that I did wrong. Let's see what the console tells to me. Mm. I used it exactly as it's required by. Let me see what's there, or what's the problem. Yes, here. Yes, probably I. React does not recognize. So these are some warnings explained as errors by React anyway. They are warnings. The real error is only this. And honestly, I don't know what I did to to create this error. It's the first time I see it. Let's see if okay. What I did is I understand now. Instead of passing the function, I called it directly in the here. The correct syntax is this because this is the handler that have to be called. So this function have to be called when you click. Doing this, I called it and returned the value here, and it was not the correct usage. This is the correct one. Now it works. As you can see here, I can increment the counter, and this is the local state of the component instead itself. It is the map component. The React way of keeping state inside. But if you want to share the state between components, between applications, and so on, you have to use the the reducer. To do that, we can create a reducer in the reducer directory and a connection that triggers. Instead, what we can do here is to convert this into a reducer. And actions, and the state can be created in the reducer. This is only an example to explain how to create, of course, reducers and so on. So I created a new file, reducer web client reducer directory, called example, and I can create a reducer that simply and an action file in the actions directory with the same name. Call it actions. I call it example, and I can create the action. Typically, we use the action type to define the action types X as constants at the beginning. Increment. Another convention that we use is to prepend the type with a string that identifies the plugin or the piece of state interested. Example. In order to avoid an increment counter, another increment counter action named somewhere else in some other files. This is the action type, then I can export also the action creator. This simply returns an action with type. Okay. So here we have an action. We can create a reducer. Reducer is a function that has an initial state. Let's see that the counter is equal to 0 in the initial state, and then it gets the action. Then typically it has a switch case. The action.type that parses the type and intercept it. Now we are interested to return the old state in all the other cases, and only use increment counter that can be imported by the actions file. I imported the record. There is another action file called example. Okay, I've seen it. Yeah, this one. Okay. Here I modify the old state. I return a new state. Incremented. And this action together with the reducer implement the logic to increment and decrement the counter. Let's see what are the syntax errors here. Okay, expect the return value, return. Bracket is not important here and there. Here, okay, now the syntax is okay. This action and this reducer implements the logic of incrementing the counter. So I can use this instead of using set count. I can use props.increment counter here. It only increments. The logic is implemented there. I can call it counter here. Now I get the variable that was local. Now I get them from the properties. I create another selector to get the counter. State.example.counter. This is an important part. Let's see it. Here I can declare in plugin the reducers. Using this syntax, I can declare reducers and then the name of the reducer, example, and I can get a function. This name is the name that will be assigned to the slice of the state implemented by this reducer. So declaring the reducers in the plugin reducers allow to add pieces of state to the whole application. So you can add this piece of the state implemented by this reducer, and here we can see for the moment this syntax in the creation plugin allows to add the piece of state managed by this reducer to the global state. And this is the name of the piece of state. So now when we do this somewhere in the code, we will be able to access that piece of state simply by the same name. I can use the optional chaining in order to avoid possible errors. I cannot resolve actions. I don't know where I imported. I can remove this. In example actions, I don't know why I imported. Let's see what is okay. let's fix the syntax and the path solving. Chance example. Resolve lips Ajax that is not present. Yeah, probably. I had an old file here, and I renamed it, and I did some changes, and so Webpack didn't recognize that I renamed this one, and I was using this one. So in this case, you have to, because it was trying to get lib Ajax that is present here, but not here. So in this case, restarting web dev server is more than enough. Now it will work. It will work. If we finished this example, I will explain you how to. I will use the other example I created in order to explain you how to do, for instance, some Ajax requests, and we in this way we can complete more or less how to develop a plugin section. And tomorrow I suggest to continue with the project part. That is a small piece of this training, and that is important also for the Geonode part. But I'd like to give you more as much as examples and repeat the procedure of creating actions, reducer, and so on as much as possible in order to let you get in inside the system and understand how to develop and do things. So at the moment, I didn't connected the action yet. So probably I will see only the count. I can connect the increment count, or I did it yet. Already did it. Increment counter here should be connected here. And it have to be imported from actions.example. Again, I did. Again, same problem. Okay, probably the naming JS2 is not let's restart it again. While he's building again, I'll explain a little bit more other parts. other than component, as I said, you can include the reducers here by declaring they are included automatically in the state. Then you can include the epics you want to use. If you include them here, they are part of the system, and so they will intercept and emit actions. And you can declare also containers because in some cases there are plugins that are plugins container and are able to contain other parts of the plugins. This is the case of this menu, for instance. In these plugins, typically the component is the main panel. The component you declare here is the main panel, and then there are some declaration about again there are some declaration about the, how to include insert in other plugins some entry points in order, for instance, to add an entry to this menu or something like that. This is probably a simple, yes, probably there is, okay, maybe I can imagine that. Okay. But here there is other user. I'd have to rename this too. Let's see one for example. The catalog we have seen, it's very big as a plugin, but anyway, it is called, let's see, for instance, just the, it has a bad name, but anyway, this is the catalog, and it has, as you can see, many entry points like these. These are the containers. This is the other syntax defining the containers, and allow to insert some entries here and there. I hope this compiling runs. Otherwise, I think I have to switch to the next part. Okay, now it didn't work yet. I don't know. I don't. Probably it's a stupid thing. MapStore 2 example actions. It's importing the wrong file. Example actions example. Yes, there is some mixing between the actions that are created here, and there are some conflicts with the names. Probably example actions. Mm. Ah, okay. And where it is? This is imported. I imported in errors this file somewhere, and this file was a thing that can remove. because it was in older directory, and now it works. Or at least it will not resolve the file that I imported, and I can. Okay, it was probably an error I did. I imported it in plugin. Yes, yes, this is the problem. Instead of importing the correct this, I imported this one. Okay, now it should work. Sorry for the mistake, but I forgot that I had that directory example with some files, some old files from a previous training or something like that. That I collected. Now the build will work. Yes, now it's working. Let's see again the map. Let's reopen the new map just to, sorry. Now it's not connected, but at least it compiles. Okay. Now let's see what happened. Let's check how did I did it. Current counter state.example.counter. Let's see if the global states contains the example state first. And let's see if increment counter triggers correctly the action, and it works. But the state doesn't change, and the state doesn't seems to contain it. So I think that I imported it wrong in the wrong way. Reducers. Maybe I wrote the wrong reducer here. Export default. Okay. If you export one single file, you export in the export import syntax has this rule. If you export a constant in example somewhere else, you have to import example. If you export default, you can import example like this, or if you need to do require, you have to use .default. I repeat it again, even to me. So as well I do export default. I can see example, you can see it in the reducers with counter equal to zero, and as well as I click here, I increment the counter. You can see that every time the counter is increased. Now I should explain you in the last half hour how to do Ajax requests in order to have more plugins that are more useful on the client side, because you can do it with funcs or you can do it with epics. Here I had a predefined example, but let's do it together. Now our example allow to increment the counter, to zoom in or zoom out. Now let's get some data from the server. In the server we have a version.txt file that contains the current version of MapStore. We will ask for this file remotely in order to get some data from the server. Okay. And so let's add another section to our plugin. Let's name it now this version.txt contains simply a string like this, but in production it will contain the effective version of MapStore. Let's create a button that on click ask for the version. And then let's add another if perhaps for .version is present, then I'll show this string. Otherwise, let's do it. This is the ternary operation. Otherwise, no version. Now I have this section. So it was a counter set. Let's divide it in. Prefer to divide our plugin in different sections. Style. Just to have a small padding for the div, just to don't have these bad borders. Okay. Now we have to trigger an action that retrieves the data from the server and write the version here in the state. So we have to create an action that we can use a thank for this way, for this request. And we can create it here. Here, the increment version can be The ask for version can be passed here. I don't know why, but there is a bad syntax thing here.
I think the symbol that you used is, I mean, for the characters, version
Sorry?
is the one that you used. It was version, double
Yes.
quote and single quotes. Is it the same as double quote, single
Uh,
quote? That's one. It's not the code.
is
Yes.
not this one?
There's a single quote. You put a single quote, but that's like what's the name of it?
Yeah, something.
Yeah, go. I mean, this next version. Version is before that. That's a code you
Ah,
used.
okay.
Yeah.
This yes, this is the syntax. Okay, I can use the normal syntax and see what it can do.
Still
Something like this could work. Sorry, probably this is not present. It doesn't like it anyway. I don't know.
yes. How about the question mark from the
Okay, anyway, it's only a problem of highlighting. Let's, for instance, we can simplify this by doing this and nothing more. I don't, honestly, I don't care for the moment. If I remove this, probably it will be visible. It seems like something related to this button or something similar. If I remove it, yes. If I remove this close button tag, everything will go fine. Not sure. Probably this. Yes. Okay. The syntax highlighting tool doesn't like so much this at this point. Okay. Let's continue. And now I can paste here the ask for version. I can add create a new action creator that is a thunk that is called action creator and pass it to the connect function. I import it from here and I will create it here. A thunk, we said the last time, it's an epic that returns a function. An action creator that instead of returning an object returns a function. I can return even an arrow function with dispatch. And we can create another action creator. Set version here that sets the version in the state. And I type here. The score. This is the effective action that will update the state of the application after receiving data from the server. So these have to be intercepted here from the reducer. So can you add the new case? Here in this way, I copy the old state, the whole old state, and update only the entries that I'm interested to. For instance, I can use add the version to the state with action dot version. So doing this, when I trigger this action, the version is passed to the reducer and the state is updated. And the state is updated with another entry version here. And I can pass it to the component. Okay, so as well as the trunk will call this action, it will update the state in the reducer, and this is connected to the plugin, and it will show the version. So the only thing remaining to do is to use Access. Here we have in MapStore we have customization of Access available at this libs Ajax directory. Can name it Axios because it's the same. That has some special things, special customization in order to automatically use the proxy if the request is out of the current domain, and to include the authentication where needed. So in all the Ajax all the Ajax requests are done using this tool in order to add the proper authentication if needed there, and this is not the case, but anyway, we usually use that version of Access that is Access plus some features in every point of the application to be uniform and support any kind of authentication if needed, even in the future for your application. Anyway, Access can provides a get method that you can where you can add the URL of the service you want to invoke. In this case, this is a simple static file on the server, and then it returns a promise, so you can get a response from this promise and dispatch the action set version with the version. I don't remember exactly if the response, probably here you have response.data or something like that. Access provides in data the body of the response, while other here you can find other information like headers and so on. Let's see if it worked. Yes. Let's see what happens when I click on the button. When I click on the button, I put a breakpoint here, so you can see this function is called, and automatically Redux recognizes that this returns a function, so it will call it and will pass dispatch function in order to dispatch. The calling this function will trigger the access request, and the access request will trigger a request to the server. You can see that I'm getting the file from the server. This is the content, and the content then is triggered in another action here in Redux at the end. Example, and this action triggered example set version contains this string, and this string is updates the state in the reducer, and because this part is connected, it will be shown here. We can do, of course, the same with epics. In this case, we have ask for version will be a simple action like this, for instance. Will be a simple action. like this, ask for version. No parameters in this case, and you have to create an epic, create a new epic file here. And import in the export ask version. Something X4 version. It have to be imported here. I didn't exported it yet. I didn't save it. This is not needed anymore. It's needed here. I can implicitly, I use the fair to create a request, as I said in the previous meeting, and then .map. In this way, I create a stream coming from the